Hello YouTubers, are you ready for chapter 2 of A Trek in the Desert? This is entitled The Waterfall. An hour later, Tom pulled up into the White Tank's entrance. The guard at the front gate looked at the finely polished, clean Nissan Pulsar and chuckled to himself. He knew these two weren't going to be driving out with such a pretty-looking car after going through all the dust in this park. "That'll be $6, gents," he said to Tom. Jim looked sheepishly at Tom and shrugged his shoulders. Tom pulled out his wallet and gave the attendant a 5-spot in Washington. "Would you like a map?" he asked. "No, we should be all right," returned Tom. "Thanks." "Okay, well, you two have fun. Don't get lost, and stay on the trails." The guard raised the barrier, and Tom drove on into the park. He followed the path until he got to the parking lot where the path of the old dry waterfall started. It was a hot, dry day, and by now the sun was high in the sky. However, the temperatures had not yet peaked. Tom turned the car off, put it in first gear, and engaged the parking brake. He and Jim got out, and Tom secured his vehicle. He saw a smudge of dirt and wiped it away with his shirt. He had a feeling that wouldn't be the last of the smudges before the day was over. Jim was already wandering about the path. Tom yelled at him, "Hey, wait for me!" "Well, I'm not waiting for you if you're going to clean your car all day," Jim joked. "It was only one smudge. I'm coming." He grabbed the backpack and headed towards Jim. "You really should consider using the bathroom before we start walking into all of nature," chided Tom at Jim. "But I don't gotta go, Mommy," teased Jim. "If I gotta, I'll find a cactus and go behind that." "Well, don't come running to me if you get a thorn somewhere you shouldn't," laughed Tom. The Waterfall Trail is a short jaunt into the White Tank Regional Park. It's located on the west side of the Phoenix Valley. There are many exciting hiking trails and places to explore within the White Tanks. The Waterfall Trail dead ends into a dry waterfall that only fills completely with water when there's enough rain to supply the surrounding river. There's a lot of fauna and flora to view within the borders of the park. "Hey, look at the gecko on that rock!" yelled Jim, as he poked it with a stick he found. "Boy, he sure can move when he has to." "You don't have to scare off all the creatures you see," retorted Tom. Jim ignored Tom and continued, "Maybe we'll see a javelina, or a coyote, maybe a rattlesnake." "If we do, I hope they're far enough away that I don't have to give introductions," murmured Tom. As much as he enjoyed nature, he was never too keen on meeting it up close. They continued on through the path toward the waterfall. "They sure have fixed up this path," Tom said. The path had been closed for many months, while the park department had paved most of it, and even added some steps through some of the boulders that used to require climbing to pass, before the improvements. Small wildflowers and cacti speckled the sides of the path. Every once in a while, a large saguaro cactus would loom about the two hikers. Suddenly, Jim heard a short hiss and a rattle. He froze where he stood and looked about himself. Very carefully, as he saw the long snake to the side of the path, he moved quickly back towards Tom and said, "Careful. There's a rattlesnake to our left, just off the path." "Is it big?" stammered Tom, a little nervous at the thought of the rattler being this close. "It's the biggest I've ever seen," replied Jim. "In the wild, that is," he continued. Tom and Jim skirted to the far right, giving the rattlesnake a wide berth. It hissed again and shook its rattle, but did not attempt to follow the two hikers as they passed. This caused Tom to whelp aloud and run as fast as he could until the snake was way out of sight. As Jim caught up with him, he began to laugh. "You acted so silly. It wasn't going to hurt us. It probably slithered off after the noise you made. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay now. I thought it was going to come after us after that last hiss," wheezed Tom, as he sat on a large rock to rest from his last burst of speed. He pulled out a bottle of water and chugged it down. He was still shook up over the incident, but he didn't want Jim to know how much it bothered him. Tom had grown up his whole life in Arizona, and never had he ever seen a rattlesnake outside of a zoo enclosure. Even then, the thought made his stomach churn a bit. He had never been fond of lizards, and he'd always been warned to look out for snakes and Gila monsters. "Well, we can rest here a bit before heading on," remarked Jim. He didn't want to let on that he realized that it had shaken Tom up a bit more than he had let on. "Why don't you throw me an apple? I'm getting a little peckish," he said. Tom tossed an apple to Jim and pulled out one for himself. They were red, delicious apples, and oh, were they ever delicious. In no time at all, both had eaten their apple and were ready to finish the trail to the waterfall. "Just a little farther on up the trail and we should be there," remarked Tom, as he put the empty water bottles and apple cores in the backpack. Jim and Tom began walking up the path towards their destination. After rounding a corner, they were at the bottom of the falls. There wasn't a bit of water in the small pool. Jim jumped into the dry pool basin and scrambled up where the water would normally have been flowing. He found a few footholds and climbed to the top. "Aren't you coming?" he asked Tom. "No, and I don't think it's too safe for you to be climbing up there either. You should come back down," warned Tom. Jim ignored Tom again and continued to climb to the top of the waterfall. The waterfall was not that tall. It was only about 12 to 15 feet to the top, and easily could be ascended by even the weakest of amateurs. Tom, while not afraid of heights, did not like the idea of getting up there, and then not being able to get back down. He had never ventured any farther than where he stood now looking at Jim climb with ease the waterfall wall. Once Jim reached the top, he looked about and then yelled at Tom, "You gotta come up here! It looks like there's another path we can take, and if nothing else we can follow the dry riverbed for a time and see where it leads. I've never been here before." "Are you sure?" questioned Tom. "I don't want to get lost. The park ranger said to stay on the trails." "We won't get lost. This is a trail." "Sort of," shouted back Jim. "As long as we pay attention to where we are on the riverbed, we can always find our way back to the falls. Besides, even though I'm sure you're scared off that rattlesnake, I'm not sure I want to go back that direction and chance running into it again." That was all the persuasion Tom needed. He jumped in the dried-out pond and followed Jim's lead. Finding each of the footholds that he had used, Tom easily climbed to the top of the waterfall. After a few minutes of exertion and reaching the top, Tom sighed. "Wow, it's beautiful up here." End of chapter 2. Hope you guys are liking this story, and I hope I'll get myself motivated to go ahead and finish up chapter 2 here soon. So, sorry about that. Nothing like the phone starting to ring right in the middle of your video. I'm sure it's not the first for many of you. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed chapter 2. Hopefully I'll get around to getting chapter 3 taken care of here pretty soon, and we'll see what Tom and Jim find at the top of the waterfall and where they go from there. Alright, y'all have a good one. We'll chat with you later. And until then, keep listening. Thanks.